Iran controlled the world's most dangerous waterway for 67 days. 20% of the entire world's oil passed through it, every single day, and Iran shut it down. And then the United States did something that nobody predicted, something that didn't involve bombs, didn't involve a ground invasion, and it changed everything. This is the story of how Iran's iron grip on the Strait of Hormuz just cracked, and what happens next could rewrite the entire global order. Before we talk about what the US did, you need to understand what the Strait of Hormuz actually is, because if you don't understand this, you cannot understand why the whole world is watching right now. Picture a narrow strip of water, just 21 miles wide at its tightest point, on one side Iran, on the other Oman, and flowing. Through that tiny passage every single day, roughly 20 million barrels of oil. That's about 20% of the entire world's seaborne oil supply. Saudi oil, Emirati oil, Qatari gas, all of it moving through this one choke point like blood through an artery. If this strait closes, your gas prices spike, your heating bills explode, global markets go into freefall, airlines ground planes, shipping companies bleed billions. This is not a regional issue, this is a global pressure point, and Iran knows it. Iran has always known it. For decades, it was their nuclear option, not uranium, but oil, the unspoken threat. Mess with us, and we will turn off the lights for the entire world. Then February 28th happened. The United States and Israel launched coordinated airstrikes on Iran under Operation Epic Fury, targeting military facilities, nuclear sites, command centers, and in the chaos of those strikes, Iran's supreme leader Ali Khamenei was killed. Let that sink in. The man who ruled Iran for over 3 decades, gone in a single night. Iran's response was immediate and furious. Missile barrages hit Israeli cities, U.S. bases across the Gulf the way Qatar, Bahrain were struck. Hezbollah in Lebanon launched rockets into Israel. The Middle East was on fire. And then Iran pulled its most dangerous card. They closed the Strait of Hormuz. On March 4th, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps officially announced no ship passes, not without Iran's permission. And they meant it. They boarded vessels. They struck tankers. They laid sea mines in the water. Within days, giants like Maersk, CMACGM, and Hapag-Lloyd, the companies that carry the world's goods, suspended all operations in the strait. Over 230 loaded oil tankers were trapped inside the Persian Gulf with nowhere to go. The world held its breath. Could Iran really pull this off? Here's what Iran was thinking, and you need to respect the logic even if you disagree with the strategy. Iran's military had already been heavily degraded by U.S. and Israeli strikes, their air defenses, much of their naval fleet, their missile stockpiles all taking serious hits. Iran had lost an estimated 158 naval vessels by the time Trump publicly declared victory. But the IRG had a plan. They didn't need to win a conventional war. They needed to make the economic cost of fighting unacceptable to the United States. Think about it from Tehran's perspective. Americans care about gas prices. Americans care about inflation. Americans care about grocery bills. If Iran could keep the strait closed long enough, U.S. consumer pain would turn into political pressure that would eventually force Washington to the negotiating table on Iran's terms. So Iran shifted tactics. Big naval battles. Too costly. Instead, drones, mines, swarming small boats, harassment of commercial vessels. Cheap, hard to stop. Designed not to win, but to delay, to exhaust, to impose costs. The IRG even began charging over $1 million per ship just to attempt passage. The strait became a shakedown zone, and for a few weeks this strategy actually worked. Now here is where it gets fascinating, because what the United States did next was not what Iran expected. Trump had been threatening for weeks. He said he'd bomb Iran back to the Stone Ages. He talked about seizing the strait by force. He called in NATO. He called China. Everybody said no or did nothing. The UN Security Council resolution to authorize military force was vetoed by Russia and China on April 7th. So what did the US do? On April 13, 2026, the United States imposed a full naval blockade not of the strait but of Iran itself. This is the move. This is what shifted the entire equation. The U.S. didn't try to fight through the strait head-on. Instead, it flipped the blockade around. Over 10,000 U.S. military personnel, more than a dozen warships, dozens of aircraft, and a single clear message: no ship goes in, no ship comes out of Iranian ports. If Iran wants to choke the world will choke Iran right back. It was strategic judo. Iran's weapon economic pain through maritime disruption was now being used against Iran with exponentially more force. The Iranian economy, already crippled by decades of sanctions, was now being strangled from both sides. Their own exports, oil, goods, food imports all frozen, the same economic weapon Iran tried to wield against the world was now pointed directly at Tehran, and that's when the cracks started showing. By mid-April, Iran was already signaling fragility. On April 17th, Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi announced that the Strait of Hormuz was open to all commercial shipping. The announcement was stunning. Oil prices dropped 11% almost immediately. Markets around the world exhaled. But here's what that announcement really was: a negotiating retreat dressed up as a gesture of goodwill. Iran didn't open the strait because it wanted to. It opened it because the U.S. blockade was working, because the economic pressure was becoming unbearable, because Iran's new leadership, Khamenei's son, Mojtaba, rushed into the supreme leader role amid the chaos, was dealing with an economy in freefall, a military that had absorbed devastating losses, and a population that was suffering. Even Iran's parliament began discussing a formal law to charge tolls to vessels, a move analysts saw not as strength, but as an attempt to monetize a situation they could no longer fully control. And then on May 4th, the U.S. launched Operation Project Freedom, Navy escorts guiding stranded merchant ships out of the Persian Gulf. Day 1. Success. 2 American-flagged vessels made it through under military escort. The symbolism was undeniable. The cage door was being pried open. Here's what gets buried in the geopolitical noise: real people are suffering. The UN Zone Emergency Task Force issued a chilling warning. If fertilizer shipments currently blocked in the strait are not allowed through soon, 45 million more people could be pushed into hunger and starvation. Not soldiers, not governments, civilians, children, farmers, the ripple effects of this one choke point stretch. To Africa, South Asia, the entire Middle East. Think about that number, 45 million people, because of a strip of water 21 miles wide. This is why the stakes of what's happening in Hormuz right now are not just about oil prices or American politics or Iranian nuclear programs. This is about the fragility of the system that feeds and fuels the modern world and what happens when that system gets weaponized. So where are we today? Iran and the United States remain locked in a dual blockade, Iran restricting passage through the strait, America blockading Iranian ports. Neither side has blinked completely. Ceasefire talks mediated by Pakistan have stalled. Trump declared Iran's latest proposals totally unacceptable. He paused Operation Project Freedom not because it failed, but because back-channel diplomacy signaled a possible breakthrough. Trump himself flew to Beijing to meet with President Xi, trying to get China, the world's largest buyer of Iranian oil, to use its leverage to push Tehran toward a deal. China has so far refused to fully comply, though it has sent subtle messages of frustration to Iran over the strait closure. Meanwhile, Iran's foreign minister is warning the U.S. to stop being dragged into a quagmire. The URG is still threatening that any U.S. military vessel approaching certain zones will meet a severe response, and Iran's parliament is pushing legislation to formally codify control over the strait even as that control visibly slips. The ceasefire holds barely. Both sides have violated it. The clock is ticking, and the world is watching. Here is the uncomfortable truth that most commentators won't say plainly. Iran has proven that the Strait of Hormuz can be weaponized. For decades, this was a hypothetical threat, a trump card nobody played. Now it's been played. And even if a deal is reached tomorrow, even if the strait fully reopens, the world now knows 2 things. First, a determined regional power can hold global energy markets hostage. The insurance premiums, the rerouted tankers, the grounded industries, none of that will be forgotten by corporations, by governments, by markets. The age of assuming Hormuz would always be open is over. And second, the United States can respond with asymmetric economic force of its own. The naval blockade of Iran was not a perfect strategy. It has costs, it has risks, but it demonstrated that America can flip the economic weapon back, and that calculation will shape every future confrontation in this region. We are watching a reordering of how global maritime power actually works in the 21st century. Not just missiles, not just boots on the ground, but blockades, drones, economic strangulation, and the weaponization of trade routes. This is the new battlefield. So is Iran's will to fight in Hormuz truly broken? Not completely. Not yet. but it is bending in ways that would have seemed impossible 3 months ago. The military is degraded, the economy is strangled, the new leadership is young, untested, and under unimaginable pressure. The ceasefire is fragile, and America's blockade isn't going anywhere until a deal is signed. The next 30 days will define whether this ends in a historic agreement or an escalation that drags the entire world deeper into crisis. One thing is certain, the Strait of Hormuz will never be looked at the same way again. If this story matters to you, and it should, because it affects everything from the price of gas in your city to the food on tables across the world, make sure you're following this channel, because we're going to track every move of this deal. As it unfolds, drop in the comments, do you think Iran will sign a deal, or will this escalate? Let's talk.